Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years. Pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This week I have an updated conversation with Amara Miller. Now I have to say, I adore talking to Amara. She has such an amazing amount of foresight and understanding about the yoga industry as a whole and yoga organizations specifically. One of my favorite things about doing this podcast is having people bring up other aspects of the industry that are at play, which I've not considered as fully as the guest has. And this is one of those conversations. Amara brings up how so many of our lineage holders, humans with great wisdom in this tradition that we all love, are getting older. And I agree with her that it's important for us to consider how we maintain and hold on to that knowledge that makes yoga such a dynamic and meaningful wisdom tradition. This conversation inspired a plan for a project I will be working on for the magazine in 2027, and I am pretty excited about it. In the meantime, if you love this podcast, check out the more formal and in-depth version of this work at Inside Yoga magazine. A year's subscription costs $57 and gets you access to my writing and the writing of other folks in this industry who love our working lives as much as we do. Head to www.thesunlightexperience.com/inside yoga home to snag it today. Also, if you would do me a solid and follow, subscribe to the podcast from wherever you're listening, and then share it with a friend, I would be very grateful. Now, let's get into it. A conversation with Amara Miller. Friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, so here is my friend Amara Miller on the podcast again for a conversation. So we're updating her conversation from 2 years ago, which was an industry conversation talking about the history of the yoga organizations. So Amara, will you tell everybody who you are and what you do, and we will get into it.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be back. Thank you so much for having me, Rebecca. Hi, my name is Amara Miller. I am an associate professor at Cal State East Bay out in the Bay Area in California. And I teach sociology and I do research on yoga. So in particular, my research is on the yoga industry and especially yoga teachers and kind of how that industry developed and grew since it kind of came to be in the early 2000s. So I study yoga professional associations, yoga teaching, and especially like the experience of yoga teachers in the industry. So I think that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm very excited. It's definitely one of my favorite topics.
I know. We're like 5 people on the planet that are like really thrilled to have this conversation, but I love it.
I mean, it is somewhat depressing, but also, you know, hopefully inspiring. We'll try to get to a little bit of inspiration.
Yeah. That's our goal, is to turn it around so everybody has hope at the end. We've got like 45 minutes. We can do it.
Excellent.
Okay. So the last podcast was about the history, how we got to where we were today. Okay. What are you seeing from yoga organizations in the yoga industry today? Like, give me a pulse point. Where are we at?
Yeah. So I think one thing to keep in mind, first off, in thinking about the current moment with the yoga industry, is the industry is changing and it has evolved over the last, I would say, decade or so pretty dramatically. The trends we were kind of already seeing exacerbated, they got faster. So one thing to keep in mind about the industry is that in general, yoga has just gotten less popular. So I think the heyday of popularity of yoga was probably early 2000s. There were a lot of celebrities who really made yoga something that was very appealing to a general public. With the start of social media, that also kind of caused this big boom with yoga, both for practitioners, but also for teaching. and for yoga companies, right, who are making a lot of money at that time and who are expanding very rapidly. And what we're seeing right now is a contraction. So I would argue, from the industry side of things, even though there's a huge number of yoga companies, like there's, yoga products everywhere, including big name folks who are not yoga companies who are getting into the game. But because of that, the market is very flooded. And that's the case pretty much across the board in the industry. And we're also seeing it become less popular with general practitioners and what I would call like yoga users who maybe aren't deep in the practice, but who maybe just take a class every now and again. So we have less people doing yoga, practicing yoga. At the same time, we have even more companies trying to sell us things for yoga. And because of that, also with the industry kind of in flux over time, we've also seen this boom of yoga teachers because so many of the folks in the industry like used teacher trainings as cash cows. There's way more yoga teachers now than even there's demand. And so it's created this very difficult yoga industry to navigate as a teacher. And it's also, I would say, gone online at a degree that we have never seen before post-COVID. Because COVID pushed everyone online, including teacher trainings and all this stuff online. And unfortunately, a lot of the professional associations have very much adopted that. So the industry is contracting, but also overwhelmed with the amount of yoga products and yoga teachers there are available who are trying to make money in a shrinking, population of users. And then we have the shift online with AI tech now entering into the game. So I think that's like just setting the stage of getting a sense of like, where are we at right now with the industry? I think it's a very difficult time in some ways to be a yoga teacher. The pay has been suppressed. It really requires a lot of extra skills to navigate the online space. You're competing not just against other people, but you're competing against AI now. And all of that's happening in the context of a huge lack, an ongoing lack of actual oversight of teaching, right? And this has been an ongoing problem with the industry ever since, teaching kind of became a profession in yoga. We just don't really have actual legitimate oversight of either teacher trainings or teaching in general in the profession. So there definitely are a number of very well-known certifying bodies, right? Yoga Alliance, of course, being the biggest, at least in the United States and in some ways internationally. And then obviously the International Association of Yoga Therapists, right, being the specific one that most of the time is the yoga therapy one. But beyond that, there's now, I think, competing organizations even for those. None of the organizations, including the two I just mentioned, are actually like regulatory bodies. So they're not actually regulating teacher trainings. They have some standards, but it's been historically and still presently very sketchy as to whether those are actually being monitored or adhered to. And so all of this is like making this very complex situation where we're not only seeing intense competition, I think, for yoga teachers, regardless of your certification background, we're also seeing now a competition for certifying bodies, I think, to get those teachers on board to pay them money in order to even sustain themselves, right? Because with yoga shrinking, with less people practicing, folks like YA, the Yoga Alliance, like they're going to have more competition to even get people to sign up as members who are teachers. So even though there's this big, huge, overwhelmingly large class of people who are trained as yoga teachers, there's huge competition for those money bits, right? Or the little bits they pay every year to be certified, basically, with whatever org they choose to be certified with. So that just, I think, sets the stage. That's kind of what I've been seeing as a researcher of this. And these are all trends that like we already were seeing coming in the early 2000s, but they've just gone even more, I think, intense post-COVID, and has made it extra difficult to navigate.
Yeah, I think in like the 2010s, when those regulatory bodies were there and everybody was getting certified, we still had so much work that it almost didn't matter that they were building infrastructure. We sort of had what I call the soloist era, where you could kind of be like a personality, right? You could go, you could have people follow you, you could figure out what your like niche was. You're going to be the person who talks about, whatever, widgets and yoga. whatever that is. And then you have a widget and yoga course, and then you read a widgets and yoga book. And that era doesn't exist anymore. You can't work that way anymore. And now we're really left with no guardrails.
Yeah.
So my question is it too late? like, are we just screwed?
No, I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think there's no putting the genie back in the bottle with the yoga industry and yoga products. So I will
Yep.
just say, like, I mean, we can't like get rid of
Agree.
Lululemon or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, agree.
Like,
Definitely.
so like that genie is out of the bottle. That ship has sailed, right? Metaphorically speaking. I think we're gonna deal with the influx of yoga products, like yoga mats, yoga water bottles,
Yeah.
yoga leggings, like whatever. There's gonna be yoga products everywhere.
Do you remember the
That we
egg?
can't get rid of. We
Do you
can't
remember
get
the egg-shaped
Oh,
blocks?
yes, those and the wheels, the yoga wheel block. Anyway,
Oh,
there's all
yeah.
sorts of
Yeah.
wacky ones, right? I mean, we're
Yeah.
gonna see, I think, even more products. But I do think I think there's still hope, at least for the industry in terms of the profession and
Mm.
certification standards. Like, I do feel like we shouldn't give up on that. As much as I know it's kind of easy to claim like the ship has sailed, I think it's been an ongoing convo for decades, right? Even
Yeah.
when Yoga Alliance first started in, 1999, 2000, this it was never really considered like a solution per se. And I think at that time in history, it was a different era. They were concerned about different types of things. I think in some ways the risks to teaching are even higher now
Yeah.
than they were back then. Back then, they were really concerned about the risks of accountability around, especially like teaching yoga in the context of medical professions, which is why
Yep.
the yoga therapy certification happened and all this kind of stuff. And why YA had some somewhat strict guidelines. They
Yeah.
actually had some standards, right? So they were trying to hit like what is that bare minimum to teach safely back in the early 2000s, back pre-social media,
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
pre-online yoga. That has dropped even more. Like the risks are even higher now, I would probably say, for practitioners, people who are just taking classes. The risk of danger in that class is even higher, and the risk again to yoga teachers just being up a creek without a paddle, like being in a very hostile industry is even higher now. But I don't think that means we should give up. I think to me, what this kind of means is that it's more important than ever, first, for yoga teachers to organize together.
Yes.
I really want to highlight that. Like, one of the reasons why the industry has been able to resist regulation so effectively, unfortunately, and also has been able to resist unionization so effectively,
Yes.
because of the nature structurally of the industry, where yoga teachers are really isolated from each other, especially in
Mm-hmm.
the US. This changes a little depending on the country, but in the US context, like yoga teachers usually are very disconnected from other yoga teachers.
Yeah.
A lot of folks work in very small scale spaces, or they are contract employees, right? They don't even necessarily work with other yoga teachers. They like contract with a gym or whatever
Yep.
it might be. So there's a lot of isolation with the online space. That the pro of the online world in yoga is that we now are very connected to each other. It's now very possible, I think, to organize yoga teachers in a way. And unfortunately, the industry's also meant that there's a lot of big players that hire a lot of yoga teachers, because there's a lot more big studio chains that have more sway now, because a lot of studios have gone out of business. Unfortunately,
Yep.
COVID, some smaller studios have gone out of business. So because of that, I do think there's an opportunity first for yoga teachers to actually start working together to pressure the industry. I also think the regulatory context has changed, right? Because the risks are higher in some ways, I would argue, for users now. Now you go to a space, and we're kind of back in that wild, wild west era where you don't know if your teacher is really adequately trained. You could be
Yeah.
taking yoga from an AI chatbot online. I mean, like, that's the world we're moving towards, where if you have an
Yes.
AI like chatbot teacher, like, do you know?
Yeah.
If you're online, it's hard to know sometimes. So I think we're moving towards that direction, where the risks are especially high for practitioners, and that changes the regulatory context. I think in the past, it's been very possible to make the argument that we don't necessarily need state level, government level regulation, at least in the US context. because we could handle it ourselves, right? So this is the
Right.
claim that the
Right,
yoga
right, right.
industry, the YA would just
We're
handle it
fine.
themselves. We're fine.
Yeah.
That was very much the argument that the Yoga Alliance took in a lot of legal cases. I think that's changed, frankly, also too. I think it's harder for professional associations to make that claim that we are able to maintain safety in the context of the industry the way it is. And I do think that opens up opportunities for more regulation of yoga, which I know is not everyone's favorite topic. I know there are a lot of very prominent teachers who are very anti-regulation, including Leslie Kaminoff, obviously being one of the most famous.
Yes.
But I do think the context has changed.
Yeah.
And I think we would be foolish to think that the context of the late 1990s is the same as the context right now in the 2020s. And I do think as teachers in the industry, there's a sense of, I would argue we should have a sense of responsibility in order
Yeah.
to revisit that if needed. So I do think if yoga teachers can organize together, if yoga teachers are willing to entertain the idea of regulation, I don't necessarily think it would be a bad thing for us as an industry. In fact, I would argue that it's probably the hope we have to kind of create some sort of actually real standards and oversight that not only would protect teachers more in terms of the context of their profession and protect them, economically from
Yeah.
being basically bankrupted,
Yeah.
but it would also potentially very much protect, I think, practitioners and students so that they're not taken in by folks who don't have the training, who are unsafe teachers, who are potentially abusive teachers,
Yeah.
and or fourth, maybe even aren't even real, and maybe they're AI,
Right.
and they don't have your best interests at heart. They're trying to get you to just pay money to them. So I think that context really has changed. I hope we revisit it. I do think it's possible to try to pursue some sort of governmental regulation. Obviously, very complicated. I think it would have to probably happen at a state level
Yeah.
and then national. So we'd have to like target states first and then kind of move up towards a national context. But I do think it's more possible than ever before. And I don't want us to, I think, as practitioners and as teachers who really care about like the longevity and sustainability of the practice, I do think we need to start thinking about it very seriously. And we also have to be very critical, I think, of a lot of these professional associations that are, frankly, I think, kind of stuck either in the past in a different context of the
Yeah.
industry, or two, aren't actually putting the interests of yoga teachers first. They are putting their bottom line first,
Yeah.
which is a huge problem for the industry and especially the profession when it comes to yoga teaching. And I say this not as someone who just cares about, like, obviously I care about like teachers earning a living wage in the context of late stage capitalism, but also I say this as a practitioner who cares a lot about longevity and sustainability of the teachings of the practice. Like,
Yeah.
we are getting to the point right now where a lot of our most experienced and educated teachers, in terms not educated like academia, but educated in terms of they have trained with so many amazing yogis, and they have actually, so much knowledge of the practice. They have probably forgotten as much as I've ever learned about yoga.
Right.
A
Right.
lot of these teachers are older, and we are hitting a demographic cliff where we are going to start losing some of our most experienced and knowledgeable yoga teachers, and we are not going to get that knowledge back unless
Yeah.
we can retain it somehow. So I think this is also an issue of not just like the industry and profession and like economic concerns around like just having a living wage, but also it's a existential threat to the kind of intergenerational transmission of the practice and the retention of our knowledge of yoga across generations, which I think we're starting to hit that cliff where a lot of these folks who are our most experienced teachers are elderly, frankly, or they're
Yes.
getting close to being elderly, and we're going to lose them soon. Unfortunately, rest in peace. I mean, we've lost so many teachers in the last 10 years who are really well known. So I think that's also a concern for me as well, and one of the reasons why I think this is so important.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I think you and I are the two people who believe that regulation is probably where we have to go. I mean, specifically for training programs to start. Like, those programs have to be regulated in some form or capacity that's just not happening right now. And yeah, it does protect the practice because if we don't do that, like we were talking about before we hit record, like the extraction economy will pull every tiny aspect of yoga out of the traditional practice and strip it for parts And then psychology is going to take meditation and breath work. And fitness is going to take the asana. And, there'll be spiritual people who nobody knows who are going to take the philosophy. You know what I mean? And it's like I feel like we have to fight for the practice, like to keep the practice together at this point. And not a lot of people are seeing that because when the practice stays together, there's also guardrails to keep it safer. Like you go into pranayama, but you've had asana before, so body signals and things like that. And before asana, you had the philosophy, and the philosophy, so it's a system, and we're stripping the system, and that's just not good for anybody. Before we keep going, I want to tell you about something I built because it didn't exist and it should have. Inside Yoga Magazine is a trade magazine for yoga professionals, not a wellness lifestyle blog, not a beginner's guide to down dog, a trade magazine, the kind that treats our work as the legitimate profession it actually is. It's digital, it's ours, and it's the first of its kind. If you've ever picked up a trade publication in literally any other industry and thought, why doesn't yoga have this? Well, now it does. You can find it at InsideYogaMagazine.com. The link is in the show notes.
Yeah, it absolutely is not. And it's definitely this like siloing of parts of yoga into different spaces,
Yes.
which comes from an industry that appropriates, right? That's the nature of
Yes.
capitalism and the yoga industry as a commodification of yoga is to strip it of its meaning and to divvy it up into parts and then to sell it back to people, both teachers and to practitioners and people who are both. And yeah, it's a very big problem that I think has started with the shift towards like asana is only asana in like yoga studio or like gym spaces where they only teach the physical side. Back in the day, way back in the day, pre 1990s, pre 1980s, like yoga was taught in a context where all of this was holistically taught, like together, maybe not at the same time, but like in the same spaces. So you'd have a space that was teaching yoga and you would learn philosophy and you would learn, pranayama and you would learn meditation and you would learn asana and you would do it all. And it was all taught within that one location, and maybe even the same teachers. But now it's like we've shifted it to only offer asana, right? And group yoga postural classes usually is the most prominent one. Maybe, individual ones, but one-on-ones. But you're offering that without the context. And as much as like these, and I think that was the argument ultimately against regulation was this fear originally that regulation would medicalize it, right? And strip it of the spirituality, which I understand the concerns around that. I think it's already happening. And I think that's the thing that people don't want to acknowledge is like, we're already seeing that occur already because of the nature of the capitalist system and especially of the way professions have, how do I want to say this? The professional organizations like Yoga Alliance have not pushed that oversight to ensure that things like philosophy standards and things like that are being met adequately, right, in training. So it's already been happening. And we've already seen that these professional associations like aren't able, I think, to address it, or they haven't been able to address it adequately yet. So if we're already seeing it happening, I think regulation in some ways is some protection, at least for standards not slipping. And that's one of the other things we've been seeing, right, is that standards originally were created at a very low bar, which is very normal for professional associations in general. Just making sure my lights go on. But so generally when a professional association or like organization creates standards for any type of profession, what happens is they usually hit the lowest possible bar, right, in general, because that's what everyone can agree on. So that was already going on in yoga. But what we've seen over the last 2 decades is that there's been pressures to lower and lower and lower and lower and lower them. And that's what's been happening, right? One of the easiest ways to see it is the online trainings right now, where back before COVID, I will say YA was holding a line that you have to have in-person elements to a yoga teacher training pre-COVID. That ship sailed with COVID because everyone went online with COVID. And then suddenly now YA is like 100% online trainings are fine. And that's the case, I think, with everything. And it's lowered a lot of the standards again. And then even more, we're seeing, again, these kind of pressures to get the standards lower and lower. or to just like tack on certifications for additional things in a way that doesn't adequately like really cover, I think, the depth or complexity of some of these topics. So it's a problem already. I get why people are afraid of regulation, especially governmental regulation, especially around the spiritual aspects of the practice. Um, we teach religious studies in academia, and that has regulation. We're still able
Yeah.
to teach those things. Like, there's masters in yoga studies programs in the US that teach philosophy very deeply within a regulatory context, right, of academic accreditation, and it's fine. So I
Yeah.
do think there are ways we could still teach spirituality in the context and like worldview of yoga from a diverse standpoint, within a regulated context, that would probably ultimately even be stronger than they are right now, where there's just so little oversight, and it's only getting worse, in my opinion. I think the oversight element has only gotten worse in recent years, as much as
Oh my
I
gosh.
hate to say that, but I mean it's true. And you see it like if you're on the online space. I mean, I get ads for teacher training programs that I'm just like, how is this?
Yeah.
And they're claiming they're YA certified. I'm like, this is not even a 200,
All
like it's
asynchronous.
all asynchronous. Like, is it 200 hours? Probably not from what they're
Mhm.
advertising. It's they're assuming people spend these extra times on homework, and how can you really regulate any of it? It's so bad. So yeah, I think it's already bad.
Yeah.
So at this point, like, what do we have to lose? We're already struggling as an industry. I think it's not a bad thing to be able to revisit and say the context has changed and that we might need to rethink how we regulate things. Um, YA has not worked, in my opinion. I mean, don't want to
No.
throw them under the bus, but just because I can be
Throw
critical of
away.
them, I'm one of the few people I think who can speak very bluntly about them because I don't teach full time as a yoga teacher. I teach sociology full time at a
Yeah.
university. So I have some freedom to actually be very blunt about it. And I do think YA has failed.
Yeah.
The original intention of YA in some ways succeeded in creating a very, very low bar for a 200-hour
Yeah.
training certify, system, but it's completely unsupported in practice, like on the
Yep.
ground. Like, how are we able to actually maintain it? Like, we can't, and even YA is pulling back on kind of being
Still.
point for certification standards, and that's concerning to me because if we don't have anything, then it is literally the wild, wild west, and we will
Mhm.
absolutely be seeing 30-hour weekend teacher training programs again, which is what we were seeing back in like the 70s and 80s, starting to happen, which is why YA was originally formed. So yeah, I think we need to revisit the moment. I think the context is very different. I think the risks have never been higher. But I do think that also means we have more opportunity than ever as teachers to actually organize for a better industry and a better
Yeah.
profession in the future that not only will serve teachers better, but will also, I think, serve students better and protect the
Yeah.
practice across time.
I think in this right now 2026 modern context, also people need to watch out for the dog whistles of the throwback libertarians of the 2010s. I think people don't understand how much of what we have today was built by people who fundamentally don't believe in oversight in any way, which is fine for you to believe in your own house is a different thing entirely when you're applying it to an entire group of people who are trying to create a profession.
Yeah. No, and I think that is very true. And it was very much prominent, right, during that era, this fear of regulation, that, things shouldn't be regulated. But we shouldn't let that stop us from, I think, again, like revisiting the
Yeah.
context and, thinking about how if it's teacher driven and not just like government driven, it has to be something that teachers have a say in, I think,
Yep.
first. Obviously, right now, I would say the best bet is probably against state level organizing. The federal government right now in the US is a hot mess. Um, but but I do think like on a state level, like there are ways to have it be very teacher driven. There are ways to have it really honor the practice if we take the time to do that. I also will say, obviously I'm pro regulation of the practice, but I also do think we really need to revisit the automatic colonial take that like traditional lineages are a problem. And this like
Ooh,
story about how
say
traditional
more.
lineage practice is somehow dangerous or inherently abusive. I really hate that narrative. And it's been a very prominent narrative of the same
Yeah,
people who resist regulation, and a lot of folks who claim that like lineage traditions and these kind of more traditional styles of yoga are somehow inherently bad or abusive. I really think we need to revisit that as well because in the context we're in now, we don't have regulation yet. I'm very pro like doing it's a multi-year venture, right?
yeah,
But let's say even if we could get folks on board and we could like organize for it, it's still going to be several years away at least. In that context of like this flux of the industry right now and not having regulation yet, um, one of the few things that you can count on is in some ways at least lineage traditions have a tradition that you can point to and you
right.
can be like
Yeah,
this is what is taught, this is what we believe, this is the standard of our lineage tradition that all these
yes,
teachers meet, and here's the entire lineage and history of all the teachers, which you can go look them up and you can
yeah,
see who trained with who and you can track things. You can't track forest yoga or whatever it might be,
yeah,
right? I mean, not to throw them under the
yeah,
bus. There's so many of them. Like, we could pull a million names of all these new styles of yoga, these teachers that basically just like make it up.
yeah,
So I know this has been called like the post lineage tradition. I don't even know why they would call it tradition, but there's this push I think to find lineage traditions somehow very problematic. I personally believe a lot of that is rooted in racism, and again, a very colonial take on lineage being somehow uncivilized, which I really disagree with. I do think people have to be mindful of abuse, right? In any tradition,
yeah,
in any lineage that happens, even in post lineage traditions, there's a
yeah,
bunch of abusive teachers in the modern world. Not all of them are lineage traditions. So I do think you have to be mindful as a practitioner or as a teacher in training to be mindful of abuse maybe at play. But I also do think like it's better if you are someone who wants to take a yoga class to take it from a teacher where you can track their lineage tradition than
sure,
to take it
sure.
from some random person who says they did a teacher training with some other random person and they have no way of tracking who they trained with and whether or not they actually got adequate training. So I also think there's an element where we have to be willing to truly decolonize the practice.
Yeah,
And in that context, especially right now, before we have regulation, hoping that that does change, um, to be willing to admit that certain kind of traditional lineages do help at least a little knowing what you're getting into.
yeah,
Versus a tradition, I don't even want to call them traditions, versus a style of yoga or
sure.
a teacher
Vinyasa,
who,
whatever.
yeah,
What?
who
Yeah.
has no, it's just floaty. It's like they've hodgepodge together new age witchcraft with some
And tarot.
postures and probably some social justice language. Like they just
Yeah.
smushed it all together and they're like calling it yoga. It's problematic and it can again be very risky. Um, so I think again, those risk levels have never been higher, in part because that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this hodgepodge of anyone can do anything and call it the practice, so long as you meet that, bare minimum of certification
Yeah.
standards. Um, and that's concerning. That's concerning to me.
Okay, let me ask you this because I just wrote like a whole section about this for this project that I'm doing. But like, how in today's modern day standard, if somebody was to say to you, Amara, how do I pick a yoga teacher? What do you say to them? Like, what questions are you telling the consumer to ask? Because I've been thinking about this too. Like, what are you telling people?
God, I mean, that's a really tough question. I would definitely want the person to investigate who that person trained with.
Right.
So I do think if you're picking a yoga teacher, you should always look into what their background is, who they trained with, what their experience level is. If there are reviews from students, always check those out,
Yeah.
because I do think that's very important. But yeah, I mean, and fortunately, it's kind of a crapshoot because you can check if they're certified with like YA or something, but whether that tells you much, it doesn't really tell you much. I would definitely do some Google searching. And I would
Yeah.
definitely Google search that teacher's name with the word scandal and just see what comes up, just to be on the safe side. But
Totally.
yeah, I think you kind of do have to do your own like research on the
Mm,
person right now. Again, it's helpful if they're part of a lineage tradition where that's very easy to look up. And that's why,
yep.
again, I think those can be very helpful in the modern context, or at least part of a tradition of teaching that goes back at least far enough where you can track. There's definitely some teacher training programs that have been around for a long time now. But yeah, student reviews, doing some Google searches, definitely look up if they have any scandals associated with them if you can. And then yeah, if you can get feedback from current students, I do think that's also really, really helpful. Um, if you don't know enough to even gauge that though as
Yeah.
a student, um, I would ask other teachers about them as well.
Yeah. That's
I
one
do
of the
think
things
most
I
students
wrote.
don't know enough to
Yeah.
judge. Yeah.
I wrote that and I said, ask the teacher to describe their practice because
Yes,
that's what you really want to know. You want to know how they're practicing because how they teach is generally going to be a reflection of how they practice. So that
absolutely.
tells you so much. But then I think we, as like the yoga people who are teaching, the teachers ourselves, we really have to like put this in context for ourselves and say, okay, what am I? What if somebody said to me, describe your practice, not describe your teaching style,
Yeah.
because that's just verbiage from like whatever your teacher trainer told you.
Yeah.
But like, how are we describing our practice to somebody in a way that would give them context of what they're walking into?
Yeah.
I think because
No,
we've
and I
got
think that's
nothing
helpful.
else. We
Yeah,
have
no, and that's really a great way to like get a read on like, does this person even practice? And like, what do they care
right.
about? And if all they're talking about is postures, like that to me is a huge red flag. I mean, I love people that immediately talk about philosophy and ethics, and I'm like, yes, you're
Yeah.
my folks.
Yep.
But like most people, I think again, most students, they don't even know what they're asking. And I think that's where it gets complicated is the industry is so problematic, right? I mean, most people who practice quote unquote yoga,
Yeah.
what they're really doing is they're going to a fitness studio and they're doing a structured
Yes.
class and with a group
Yes.
of people, very little one-on-one oversight. They probably know nothing about yoga.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
okay. And that's fine if that's what you want to do, that's great. But like, are they truly a practitioner? They're kind of just like going to a gym, basically. So I think there is this context again, like, will the student even know what they like how to interpret that information is very
Mm.
challenging. And again, I think it's part of this contracting that we're seeing in the industry. Fewer people are interested in yoga. Um, the people who are more interested in yoga, I do think there's been a revitalization of an interest in the spiritual aspects, which I think is very cool.
Totally. Thanks, Gen Z.
Yes, right? Awesome.
Yep.
So rad. But again, knowing if someone's an informed teacher about those things is really difficult to gauge. So I think, yeah, asking people who also know, maybe more than you, about like who they'd recommend. I also personally, my take is if someone is really famous as a teacher, I honestly would have that be a red flag.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is maybe not a good thing to say, but I know there's some very good teachers that are very well known. But with that said, I do think like right now in the social media age, if your teacher is caring more about their social media image and their marketing on social media than they are about like actually honoring the practice, like those are different things. Some of the best teachers I know are people you've never heard of and they
I think
very
that's
minimally
been,
market and
yeah,
they
true.
just do enough to get by financially for themselves in a way that
Yeah.
honors the practice and allows them to have like a deep spiritual connection with yoga, but they're not like out to make $1 million or to
Right.
start a chain of yoga studios. Like they just want to teach some private group classes about yoga
Right.
philosophy or whatever, right? They want to
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
earn
Yeah.
just enough to like make ends meet. And those are, I think, some of the best teachers, the teachers that don't really care about the image. They don't care about the amount of likes they get. They're not ambitious in that way. They're not arrogant in that way. They're usually very humble people.
Yeah.
Um, and that to me is usually a very green flag. Like if they're very humble and then I'm
Totally.
like, and if they're calling themselves a like, I'm just an intermediate. So I'm like, oh, you're so sweet. You're so not. You're so advanced
Yeah.
as a teacher. But if
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
think you still have stuff to learn, I love that about them. And like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
absolutely think that's a green flag that they're willing to acknowledge the stuff they don't know. and to recommend other people to like fill those gaps, which a lot of teachers don't do that. A lot of teachers are like, I am your teacher, come to me for everything and buy all my classes. They won't send you other places.
Right.
So that to me is also a green flag. If they're willing to be like, I don't teach
Yes,
that,
yes,
but here's
yes.
a couple people who do and they're really cool, that's usually a really great sign of a good
Yeah.
teacher. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the industry contracting, which is the consumer side, right? There are fewer consumers.
Yeah.
Now, what I found super interesting when I was reading some data is the thing that's not contracting is people opening studios. And I like we're still here and I don't think have hit the like teacher professional contraction that is inevitably going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want someone to explain to me why the hell people are still opening yoga studio. And like it is a really difficult market to be in. And it's one thing if you buy a studio that's established, right? That's a data point that feels like a new studio, but it's not. Like what?
Yeah, what is going on? Why are there so many people opening studios? I think it's two things. First, I think we're still using teacher trainings as cash cows, right? So if you have a studio space, you suddenly can do things like offer teacher trainings. And ironically, I think this is a reflection of the industry. We pushed out so much deep actual teaching, that like more intermediate to advanced level teaching, that the only way students can get intermediate to advanced teaching or
Yes.
training in yoga or classes in yoga is to do a teacher training.
Yes.
That is literally the funnel. Like instead of actually doing, like, say, small group classes where you're learning about the Gita or whatever, right, with your teacher over a 6 month window,
Yeah.
which I do know some teachers who do that. They are, again, humble and under the radar. No one knows them. But like instead of doing that on an industry scale, what we've done on an industry level scale is we only offer group stretching at an inch or at like a beginning level, basically, of
Yep.
yoga, which I would argue even the more advanced asana practices are very beginning level for yoga in some ways, because they're just one piece of it, right? You're
Yep.
taking this one little siloed piece. You're not learning the holistic practice. So that's what we offer. And then the only way to get advanced training in yoga to learn about the
Yes.
practice is to take a teacher training. And the
Yeah.
studios are the cash cow, right? So it's a way to make money as a teacher. If you're a teacher, it appears like a way to make more money. I will just say that is an appearance. I think a lot of people starting studios, the second part of this is I think a lot of people starting studios do not know what they're getting into. One, they are being sold a lie that it is more profitable than it is. And also, third, a
Correct.
lot of them are not actually um they're not really like yoga teacher backgrounds, right? They're people who are coming, I think, a lot of times from other industries who see it as like a side hustle way to get out of something they think is quote unquote more toxic in capitalism.
Totally.
So it's a lot of people who like worked in corporate worlds and have some extra money who want to have a more meaningful career, quote unquote, and then get into studio, yoga studio spaces. So it's those two things combined. It's like those people who are trying to flee these other toxic capitalist, workplaces,
Yeah.
who see yoga as like this kind of beautiful escape. They don't know what they're doing most of the
Yeah.
time. They don't know what they're getting into because, boy, yoga studio owners earn less. One, they absolutely earn less than yoga teachers on a whole on average. Their stress is way higher, and the burnout is very real. Most studios like fold after a certain number of years. I think there's a set stat on that, but I'm sure it's probably about like 6 to 8 years, I would say, is the turnaround from what I've seen. So like that side. And then also like from a student standpoint, where else are you going to get deeper practices?
Yeah.
Like if you don't know a teacher who offers that in an accessible way, especially for students who have no idea how to find a teacher, um, that's the only venue. Is like you want to learn more about yoga, you go to a teacher training. You have to pay the
Yeah.
money and you have to go to the teacher training to get even a little bit more knowledge of the practice, because there's no real structural alternative right now for deep study, which I think is a shame. And again, this is part of the problem of the industry. I've been talking about this a long time, but like this idea that like we are not teaching yoga holistically.
Yeah.
And as teachers, we have to start offering a more holistic and deep way of teaching. We have to find a way to like teach a yoga practitioner all the things that every teacher knows. Like, how does someone who knows so much about the practice like give that to the next generation? Like, there's no way right now to do that. All
Yes.
you end up doing is teaching 200-hour and 500-hour trainings, and you never teach beyond that. Like, if we had like a Ramajoyiti Vernon, like she passed what, like 6 years ago, she
Yeah.
was so knowledgeable, and like so much of that information she had just died with her, and it was so
Yeah.
tragic, because there wasn't an avenue to like instruct new teachers on all the things she knew. It was literally just 200-hour, 500-hour, you're done.
Mm.
Maybe you mentor, maybe if you are lucky and you have a personal relationship with someone beyond that. But yeah, so I mean, it's a struggle, and that's why, again, the lineage tradition. Again, just going back, I really find it problematic that we're framing lineage traditions as somehow like abusive inherently. Like, lineage traditions give you that
They're
lifetime.
the only ones with the guardrails.
They have some guardrails, and they
Yeah.
have an expectation for lifelong learning
Yeah.
that really encourages long-term mentorship and a lifelong transmission of knowledge. You're never done learning in that context.
Right.
And I think that really does matter, because it's not the case in the industry in the West as it is now. There are these very low hanging, certifications. You can tack on a lot,
Yeah.
but how much are you really engaging in lifelong learning? I don't know. And I think it's a problem. So yeah, the studio thing is fascinating. I would argue most of the studios that have been started recently, like, I don't know how well they're going to do long term. We've seen a trend where a lot of small scale studios get swooped on and bought out by bigger studios like Core
Yes.
Power.
Yes.
There's a number of others, but so a lot of it is like there's a turnover, and there it seems like there's a lot they're not doing well. I mean, I think that's,
Yeah.
I mean, some of them are in certain spaces, and if you have, if you hustle and you get your marketing and you have the right, students who are interested and engaged, you can make it work. But it's a struggle, and it is hard, and a lot of the people running those studios and the teachers at them are not making, I would argue, a living wage. So
Yeah, I think we're seeing too, studios are answering the call of, I mean, they have no choice, right? So you've invested time, money, effort into your studio. Like, studios now have to be more than yoga in order to
yeah,
be viable
yeah,
businesses. And that's
and
like
they are.
not wrong inherently, because they're doing what they have to do as business owners to keep the doors open. But then there's that, again, the extraction of, like, if you're now a studio that has to be 15 other things, including, a whole bunch of different fitness modalities, then how are you able to hold the line for the yoga?
Yeah.
And that
Well,
really, I
yeah.
mean, we weren't doing a good job of that 10 years ago. And now even people who were holding the line then now are having to say, look, I've got to put Pilates in here. Pilates is booming.
Yes,
Yoga
they
is not.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're booming. Yeah, exactly. It's, less guilt about appropriation, and is a more
Right.
appealing track
Yeah.
for fitness if you're not
Yeah.
being guilted about why it's somehow appropriative, or how it's not
Right.
just, or you don't have
Yeah.
to learn philosophy. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, it's a struggle, and again, it's the supply demand, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, like, fewer people are interested in the practice. I do think the people who are sticking with it are more interested in the spiritual aspects than they have been in prior decades.
True.
But it is a smaller number, and the people I know who have been, I think, very successful in maintaining like a holistic teaching where they don't just teach asana and they teach a lot of other things are usually people who don't teach out of studio spaces. They're folks who teach
Correct.
independently. They're people who
Correct.
float. They teach online, and then they also like travel and they go to different spots. They teach out of, a community center sometimes.
Yeah.
But like it's
Yeah.
very all over the place, and they usually have to patchwork. They're not as prominent, like, again, are well known. So yeah, I do think the space is changing for teaching. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I think as a teacher, it means we have to be really mindful again of like, how are we just selling out? Or how
Right.
are we actually teaching? And like, how do you want to teach? And how can we do that in a way that's going to, again, ensure that longevity of the practice across
Yeah.
generations, which has been very challenging to figure out outside of, again, a lineage tradition context where that structure is built in. There are some very long-term kind of yoga teacher trainings that have been around and certain styles that have been around a really long time. But yeah, it's like a lot of the new stuff is totally just like it's tied to a specific teacher. It will not sustain them if they die. Like
Yes.
it's just going to disappear as soon as that teacher
Yeah.
stops teaching. And the knowledge they have is going to be gone. So it's a dilemma, I think, to navigate. I do think, again, teachers really need to be mindful of how they're approaching it as their own, like from their own teaching, like responsibilities. And I really do think we need to organize together. So I really encourage teachers to not teach in isolation or to not think about themselves as an isolated person. And I think
Yeah.
again, this comes out of a system that got rid of lineage contexts.
Yeah.
Because if you're part of a lineage tradition, like it's like you're part of that, and it's you don't teach in isolation. But if you're
Yeah.
just like a regular person who went through a 200-hour, like you don't know most people in the
Right.
industry. You don't know other teachers. Maybe you don't even know the people who teach at the same places you teach at. So like get
Yeah.
to know them, talk to each other. And I really do think we have to find a way to connect professionally outside of these certification system organizations. Because like
Yes.
the Yoga Alliance is not set up for teachers to network with each other. It's set
No.
up for you to put your name in the hat and for you to be listed on their website with no
Yeah.
connection to anyone. But it's
Yes.
not designed to like have us help organize and like self-regulate the industry at all. Like it doesn't encourage us to meet each other. And
Which
I
is
mean, that's the case
wild.
for all of
They're a
them.
trade organization.
They're a
Like
trade
that's you
organization.
have one
Exactly.
job.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's definitely a dilemma. But I do think yoga teachers need to start talking to each other. I think it's happened a little with some of the bigger studio chains, right? Where we've
Yeah.
seen, for example, like core power yoga teachers trying to unionize, and there's like been these pushes within like bigger orgs that the teachers know each other better to like try to
Yeah.
organize in a way that protects our labor. But I think we need more of that.
Yeah.
I would love to see studio owners also start to organize together. That would be freaking
Correct.
amazing. Small scale studios.
Yeah.
Because I do think studio owners, again, they're often in some ways the small studio owners are the most precarious in some ways. And I think it would be fantastic if those folks could actually help facilitate or help engage with, coordinating some sort of organizing potential for yoga teachers. But it is really difficult.
Yeah.
Most folks are very burned out. I think we're going to be forced into it, though. Again, I
I
think,
think
again,
so
the
too.
online piece and the AI piece, which we have not taught, I mean, the industry as a whole has been largely ignoring. There's a few people who've been talking about it, who are teachers who've been bringing it
Yeah.
up, especially recently. It's been a popular topic the past month. Because I know that you, I think, talked about this in one of your other things, right? That they have
Yeah.
this like all the books on yoga on Amazon are all
Yeah.
AI. Yeah. So I mean, it's coming for all of us. So I think that in that sense, like all yoga teachers are going to have to face that, just like every other industry dealing with AI, and it is going to force us to come together and to like
Yeah.
come up with something. Otherwise, you're going to lose your
Yeah.
job to an AI chatbot yoga teacher named, I don't know, like
Oh,
Sandy, who's going
absolutely.
to teach you yoga through the Wii app. Like I don't know.
I
It's
mean, it's already
where we're
in
at.
like retirement homes have
Yeah.
AI yoga teachers, and that's often been one of our like most lucrative little places that we can go and teach at, because a
It's
lot of those
really
independent
crucial for
teachers.
yoga
Yeah.
therapists. It's
Yes.
important like space.
Hmm.
And I don't mean that from the teaching side. I mean for the folks in those elderly like facility, like
Yes.
they could use yoga
Yeah.
so much on so many levels, not just physically, but like on a like so much. Yeah, and then to have AI fucking come in there and just give them slop. I mean, it's so
Yeah.
because it can be risky again, especially with elderly populations. That's alarming. Folks who have a lot of potential health risks, like you should have a trained yoga
Yes.
therapist to
Yes.
work with them.
Yes.
Because even a 200-hour grad is not going to be able to work with that population safely.
No.
So,
No.
yeah, I would argue therapists have the best training, yoga therapists. So,
I
yeah,
mean, yeah, that's pretty objective. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
Most rigorous,
so
at least right now. Could still be more.
here's my one final question for you.
Mhm.
And it is, what the hell do we do next? No, like
Yeah.
organization, like besides us collectively organizing together, which as you know is a personal passion, like what are we what else is there anything else that we can do? Is that like our one job right now?
Yeah, I mean, I do think we have to organize together to have power.
Yeah.
Um, I think as individuals, I'll talk first individual and then we'll go big. But on an individual level, I do think again it comes back to like as a teacher, like what is our obligation and our responsibility, not just to our students, but to the practice as a whole and to honoring this, very incredibly deep and meaningful practice that we're all part of. Um, so I think we have to really reflect as teachers on an individual level. Like what am I doing in the industry and is it actually ethical? Is it
Yeah.
actually like
Right. Yeah.
aligned with what like honoring the practice should be? And I don't just mean that in a very shallow, like let's say yoga was from South Asia and way. I mean that in like are we really honoring the whole of the practice and how we are approaching our teaching as a long-term project? Um, and that means like, how are we treating our students? How are we treating ourselves? Are we selling our souls for
Yeah. Right.
capitalism?
Right.
Like that's a problem. Um, so I do think we have to be very mindful. I think we have to be creative on an individual level. I do think yoga teaching now is not just as simple as walking into a room with a student and teaching them. It's
Yep.
you have to juggle a lot of different hats, and especially in the current climate, like if you're teaching yoga, you're going to have to navigate marketing and being online, and that's really hard to do ethically. And it's just exhausting. Most of us don't like doing that. It's a totally different like
Yeah.
task
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
practice. So like that is part of it now. You have to kind of just be aware it's part of it and be ready to tackle it and hopefully
Yeah.
have some skills or have people who can help you with those. So I think that's definitely a piece of it on the individual level. I encourage all teachers to, again, be holistic in how they teach, to be lifelong learners, to don't just stop at a 200 or a 500 hour or an IOIT
Yep.
like certification level. Like you should keep learning and finding ways to teach what you're learning beyond just the like standard 200, 500, whatever. Um, on a massive, more like macro level scale, again, yeah, we have to organize together. I think, especially starting to organize from like a labor standpoint within
Yep.
state level organizing, I think is especially crucial. I do think we need to start talking to legislators. I'm not sure how or when. I don't think YA should be spearheading any of that because they have a
No.
historically really anti-regulatory stance that is not helpful. But I do think like there are some very real concerns about safety that are even worse now than they were in the 1990s. And we have to start like talking about that and talking
Yeah.
about the context of people who actually have legislative power. Um, I think we should definitely try to shift some cultural stuff as best we can. We
Yeah.
really do need more yoga media outlets that are not
Woo.
controlled. Yeah, right. Which I know you're starting, and I think it's so great. I know that there are some other ones out there. Like I think Susanna Barkataki has like a magazine thing she's
She has a
doing,
magazine
which
too.
is
Yeah.
cool. But I will
Consumer
just say, like,
magazine.
we need a professional, like professionally like driven media. That's not just going to be like a capitalist, sell you stuff product advertising space. Yeah,
I
so
did not tell her to say that, y'all.
no, but I mean, for real, you didn't tell me. And I do think it's important, though, right? The Yoga Journal, back when it was started as a space for yoga teachers to educate
Yep.
each other and to share and to connect. And it quickly, not quickly, but like over the course of 2 decades, it got
Yeah.
sold out. Like, I mean, they
Yeah.
had to sell out to a magazine and now they're for profit, right? But like, we need something like that still, especially now as a way to interconnect with other teachers and to organize together. Like, we can't do that work without media support, whether that's like social media, pages or groups, or whether it's a magazine or, however we want to do it. I do think we need more of that. I love that you're starting one. I think we need even more. I would
Yeah.
urge, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you can't be the only one. Like, but I would love to see more people start to engage in content creation around yoga. That's not just AI slop and is not just about selling, chair yoga to people wanting to learn how to do chair yoga. As much as that's great. Like, we need stuff for teachers. We need
Yep.
to find a way to connect together and to talk about the political things with teaching that don't get airwave like
Yep.
play or whatever. So like we need to talk about YA. We need to talk about certification systems in yoga again
Yes.
in a real way outside of YA, monitored spaces, right? I know they did their rehash of the certifying like system like a few years ago, and they did like meetings and stuff where people could talk about it. That was within a context of their controlling the information. Like we need to have those talks outside of those organizations because we need to be critical of them and we need to frankly hold their feet to the fire. They're backing down on a lot of really important things that affect teachers every day. I still am really mad and pissed that they did the stupid online approval of I think that's horrible, and we need to call them out for these horrible decisions that they're making. And most of these people making these decisions don't have strong yoga backgrounds. Like they're people from corporate industries that get into yoga and suddenly are working for YA or whatever. So it's like a lot of these folks do need their feet held to the fire. We need other media sources to be able to do that. I think it is really lovely you're doing this. I think, again, there's just some other people kind of doing some of it, but I would love to see that type of like networking start to happen. We used to have conferences back in the day run by Yoga Journal before they sold out. Like something like that would be fantastic. I know the Race in Yoga, now the Critical Yoga Studies, they've renamed. They're starting to do some they're trying to think about doing conferences again back when they used to do them. So I think those spaces can also be very generative. I would love to see spaces like that for yoga teachers, not just scholars.
Yes.
Because I think we need more like teaching conference-y spaces where people can come together as teachers to actually not only learn to increase their skills in a way that's outside of teacher training programs, but also like organize, right? And meet people and network. And maybe talk to legislators. So I'm not sure how all of that will look. I do think it's possible, and again, I do think it's the opportunity has grown in recent years, in part because so much is shit. But excuse my French. But yeah, in part because so much else has gotten worse. I think there's even more opportunities to like have things like this podcast or things like a yoga organization or group that's independent like come in and actually make an impact, provided they are actually trying to do something and not just sell you something. And I think that's the tricky one, right? Because we've been seeing more of these kind of professional organizations pop up, but are they actually for teachers or run by teachers or not? And I think that's a huge concern. Or they're just trying to grift. They're just basically making money off teachers. They're not actually helping support the industry or the profession in a real way, in a way that addresses risk and accountability. So
Amara, tell everybody how to find you.
So hi y'all. You can find me on obviously my CSU East Bay website. You can like look up my contact information and stuff because I'm listed as a faculty member there. But you can also find me on Facebook. I do have a page on Facebook that's very out of date and I haven't posted much on, but I'm going to try to get back to. So you can definitely find me there. I have an Insta that I also rarely use, but those are probably the ones that are the best. And I do also have a website that has a blog and stuff. Again, not used too much often these days, but I'm due to get back into writing a little more about yoga, as much as it's complicated and difficult sometimes. I love just being a practitioner, but alas, not meant to be.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It was so good.
Thank you. It's so nice to see you again and so nice to talk about all these things. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for this conversation, Amara. Next week on Thursday, I have a conversation with a friend of mine, a financial planner and all-around smarty pants on insurance, Felicia Lab. Felicia and I met in 2025 at a small business expansion program. And I have to say, one of my favorite things in the world is meeting smart women who are passionate about their work. This is one such conversation, and you'll be able to tell right away. Especially if you have been curious about what kind of insurance you need or what financial planning could look like in the fitness and wellness space, this episode is for you. Until then, let's go get to work, and I will catch you around the water cooler next time.